welcome. First, thank you for joining us this afternoon, whether you're with us physically or virtually. My name is Janice McGregor, and my colleague Julieta Fernandez and I are, as was kindly introduced, the co-organizers of this symposium. And we're going to begin by speaking about autoethnographic approaches to study abroad research and how and why this particular symposium came together in the way that it did. And we'll then identify themes relevant for today's panel, outline the structure, and how we'll proceed over the next 2 hours, I suppose it is. So, oh, you already moved over. Thank you. Yeah, sorry. See, we're just good at managing each other's work here. So I'll hand this over to Julieta.
This morning, well, not morning, afternoon, I think, we will hear from a panel of colleagues who have come together in collaborative efforts to discuss the reflexive researcher in study abroad. But you might be wondering, why bring us all together, right? Why autoethnographic approaches? Recently, the study abroad research and the scholars in this area, like Uju Ani and others, have started to point out that there is a necessity for more reflexivity on the part of the researchers. In applied linguistics, more broadly, we have the work by Matt Pryor, Karen Rulstone, Stephen Talmy, and others who have directly addressed the research interview as a common method of data generation, and they have lamented that there isn't enough studies that look at it as a socially situated speech event, right? So in study abroad research, we argue that the same issues are at hand. And furthermore, few investigations have treated the research interview as a site of intercultural exchanges, right? Our own experiences conducting interviews in study abroad context have compelled us to ask what are the roles of the researcher when conducting interviews, and how does the researcher negotiate, excuse me, how does the researcher negotiate her roles, identities, and interview interactions with her participants as this work considers? Right. I think I didn't get to the whole thing. Yeah.
That's okay. So today we're going to hear from scholars doing study abroad research across different populations in different spaces and using different languages. Our work on the symposium emerged as a result of discussions that took place last year at a conference on study abroad at Rice University. A number of us had articulated similar concerns about researcher reflexivity in study abroad research. And as our discussant Beatrice Dupuy and her co-author and colleague Heather Willis-Allen wrote in 2012, it is fruitful for researchers to focus on the consequences of study abroad participation for lifelong language learning practices. And we would contend that study abroad researchers should also give analytic attention to the continued role that they play in the students' participation and trajectory abroad. And so we hope that today you'll find that the research presented uses reflexive approaches to do just that. So, some themes.
The researchers in this panel arrived at their findings via similar theoretical and methodological orientations. In this way, they complement one another in a coherent exemplification of autoethnographic approaches to study abroad research. So today, papers deal with such issues as the role of the researcher in shaping or navigating study abroad students' approaches to finding opportunities for the use of the second language, claims and narratives about nationality, language, race, gender, sexuality, mental health, discrimination, multilingual repertoires in interview interactions, and the consequences of interactional work in interviews with both cross-sectionally and longitudinally.
Yeah, and notably, all three studies that we bring up today, that we report to you today, take place in a variety of contexts and programs. So for example, the first paper will address how researchers become socializing agents in Japanese study abroad students' experiences in Canada. The second paper investigates the consequences of coordinated identity work in interactions between interviewers and interviewees, both, again, cross-sectionally and longitudinally in Argentina and Germany. And the third paper examines multilingual interactions and improvisations between the researcher and Korean study abroad students in Tanzania. So the presenters we'll also discuss empirical and pedagogical implications, particularly exploring the links between researcher reflexivity and interactional approaches, and the consequences for study abroad and language and intercultural learning. And these studies comprise original and ongoing inquiries that we hope offer some fresh perspectives on study abroad research. So we'll now introduce.
Did we say that? Okay.
Yep.
So, our first presenter is going to be Victoria Surtees, yes. And so she's going to speak for 20 minutes, and we will hold for questions until the end of the panel. So we'll have 20 minutes for presentation, then we have our discussant, and then we'll hold questions at the end. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so now I have to,
Switch.
right.
Just in the taskbar here.
Okay. Right, so I think we're ready to go. So thank you for the introduction. I was so excited to participate in this particular panel. So I'm from Vancouver, where I'm doing my dissertation research with Japanese study abroad students. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about myself as sort of what I coined as a socializing agent. And I'm not sure if that's a real term or if I made it up or if someone else has used it, but it seemed apt to me to sort of reframe myself as not just a researcher, but as a socializing agent in this context. So I'm going to talk about mostly how I, as the researcher, socialized my students into a particular identity, and we'll see in a moment what that identity is. So just a quick word about my study, so you can kind of get an idea of the context. My dissertation was designed as a multiple case study on peer language socialization. So I was really interested in what they were doing outside of the classroom, talking to each other as friends. And it was mostly descriptive and exploratory in nature and very discursive. So the program that I recruited my students from is a 9-month program, and it's delivered in English to just Japanese students from one university in an undergraduate program. And it's at a large Western Canadian university. Yes. Haha, I know, right. So the defining features of my study, the data collection instruments, were mostly interviews. Okay, so I had 12 interviews with my study abroad students, my 4 students that I recruited, 15 interviews with the various peers that they recruited, and I also got them to record 30 informal interactions between their friends. So today I'm mostly going to be talking about what happened in the interviews with one student, sorry, not 2. I started with 2 and then realized I just didn't have time to talk about both of them. So one student, Amy, who is there in the corner. So who is Amy? So Amy was the first of the 4 students to volunteer for my program. And she, like the others, was 20 years old, an undergraduate, and had an intermediate level of English. She experienced a lot of difficulties in her first semester. So I actually recruited her at the beginning of the 2nd semester because my idea was that they would have already made friends, so I would be able to examine all these wonderful interactions happening in relationships that had already been established. Except, unfortunately, all of my participants had had massive difficulties finding people to connect with. So even though they had talked to people, they hadn't really made what they would call friends. So Amy here, you can see in this quote, is expressing her discouragement at that experience. And she had decided at the beginning of the 2nd semester that she was going to change all of that she was going to take all of these wonderful steps, including joining a language exchange and a conversation group, and crucially, enrolling in my study, volunteering for my study. So right from the outset, she viewed my study as an opportunity for practice and as a way to increase her opportunities for interaction, which of course wasn't what my study had intended to begin with. What I intended was to observe the interactions that were already happening, but things don't always happen the way we want them to. So I was conflicted a little bit when I heard her reasons. And as it turned out, like I said, none of my 4 participants had made friends, and when they chose their friends to record interactions, they actually didn't choose people who they had met before. They initiated new friendships and then started recording them. So it was a bit of an interesting experience. And when I recruited them, I felt that I needed to sort of offer them some sort of incentive to want to participate. So this is part of my sort of recruitment letter here, where you can see that I very clearly position myself not just as a researcher, but as someone else as well, as an English practice partner. So I want to give you a chance to practice your English with me as a local person. I grew up just outside of the area, and as a person who was familiar with the university, which I called PWU here. And also as a study abroad student who had studied abroad in France. So I've positioned myself right from the get-go as an expert in a lot of different ways for this student, and not just as a researcher who's planning to observe. Sorry. Okay. So from the outset of my study, I had planned to look at our interaction data as talk, as interaction, our interviews as actual learning opportunities. But when I was invited then to participate in this panel, I started looking at them quite differently, and really thinking about them as interactions for learning. So a discursive approach to interviews sees them as talk, sees them as opportunities for collaboration, negotiation, and sees the researcher's contributions as shaping the output and the kinds of utterances that learners or subjects or participants, however you like to call them, produce. So my frame for my study, my overall frame, was language socialization. Now, language socialization also views interaction as a learning opportunity, a place for mediated participation. So if we view interview talk as interaction, and interaction is the medium through which socialization happens, then it's not a really far leap to think about these interactions as learning opportunities for our participants, where they may actually be taking up and forming new identities. And that's definitely supported by all of the research that I see here that uses discussion groups and blogs and interview projects as ways of promoting intercultural awareness, right? So I started to reframe this and look at the interview excerpts from that approach. So we'll look at a few of those interview excerpts here. So here's the quote from Amy that I already presented, and you notice there's that nice little ellipsis there where I sort of obscure my contribution. Well, this is what I said. Give you a moment to read it. So as Amy's describing all of her difficulties, I sort of take a moment after her turn when she's just said that she can't find good topics and she can't find good opportunities, and I say, oh, well, I wouldn't say that. I think it's hard. So what's happening when I do this is I've just respecified her difficulties as not one of a personal nature, but one of a typical nature, a nature of that's produced by the environment. So I've reproduced what she has said. I've normalized it as something that many people experience. Right? So already here you can see I'm starting to socialize her into some sort of particular kind of identity. But here she resists me a little bit, and she continues her line. She says she's depressed, and she says it's not Canada's fault, but it's her fault. She thought she was better at making friends than that, and it's terrible. Okay? So this was our very first interview, and this was really early on in the interview. So a little bit later on in the interview, I continue to sort of frame her as a brave study abroad student. So she had been continuing to explain to me that clubs didn't meet often enough, and so she just couldn't make friends. And in this excerpt, you see that I'm actually telling her a whole story about my experience when I moved to a new place and how hard it was for me, saying it just gets harder and harder over time, right? And Amy, this time, instead of sort of responding with, oh, but it's me, it's my fault, I just need to try harder, here she's starting to take up my line of it's harder and harder and it's difficult when you move to a new place. She says, yes, I really feel relief to hear that, because I thought that I am the person who have this kind of problem is only me. And of course here you can see at the bottom, and throughout, how much I align with her, how much I overlap with her, how much I am reinforcing this idea that she's not alone, that this is not her, that this is a common problem that study abroad students have. So through my stance taking in this interview, I'm socializing her into this idea that it's not her, it's a study abroad thing. And she's a brave person for persisting, really, to look for these new opportunities. And then even a little bit later on, she's telling me about her experiences over the Christmas break, where she arranged her own homestay without being sanctioned or organized by the university. She found one online and organized it herself because she wanted to continue learning during the break. And she's telling me about a great party that they had, saying, yes, it's a great memory. And I say, oh, wonderful, that's very brave to organize that by yourself. So here again, this is an explicit evaluation of her behaviors, any initiative that she takes as being brave, as being adventurous. Now perhaps you're familiar with some of Dora's work about the adventurous study abroad student and the idea of being willing, of being motivated. I've seen that a lot here, being motivated to engage. Okay, so I am definitely socializing her into that kind of behavior here through my evaluations. And then finally, or maybe not finally, but I quite enjoy this one. I would like to show you this one. The identity of that brave study abroad student that initiates conversation. Is this still on? Did it go off? Oh, he turned it down? Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm a little bit loud. It's my trademark. The identity of the brave study abroad student intersects pretty meaningfully with the brave English learner, the one that takes initiative, that tries, that actively learns and displays that learning. Okay, so here, this is our third interview now, and she's explained to me that she's made this wonderful friend in her language exchange and that they're able to finally talk about different expressions and they teach each other and it's just so wonderful. And she's clearly caught on to the fact that I like it when she tells me what she's learned and that displaying that learning is something that I evaluate positively. Okay, so here we talk about the word muffin top. Are you guys familiar with the word muffin top? Yes. So here Amy says that she's talking about, with her exchange partner, they discuss things like, I have to lose weight, things like this, but she's really smart. No, how do you say like smart? No, slim? So already here she's doing language learner, right? She's performing this word search function right at the beginning, and I participate in that. She says slim with the rising intonation, and I respond to that by confirming and ratifying her choice, saying, slim, yes, slim. Okay, so I'm contributing to her language learning here. And she says, yeah, slim. So she shows me that she takes it up and she continues on. So you don't do like this, and then I learned the word muffin top, and of course we both just cracked up because it was hilarious. And I say, oh, what a great expression. So there's my evaluative stance again, praising her for having learned all these wonderfully cultural salient things. A brand new word I learned is muffin top. Again, we laugh. Well, you don't have a muffin top, I say. She says, yeah, I have. No way. I have really, really bad. No way. Triple muffin top. So now she's using it even in creative ways, which is wonderful to see, but she knows that I'll appreciate it, right? And so then I actually say at the end, oh, these interviews have been so great because people keep telling me these wonderful expressions they're learning, but muffin top, I think, is the best one so far. So now I've completely sort of displayed how positive I view these particular kinds of interactions that she's having. So I'm socializing her into this doing good study abroad, doing good language learner kind of identity. So when I asked Amy at the end of the project, this is the very last section of our final interview in April, if she thought that the project changed the way that she engaged in English, she said absolutely, and hopefully we'll be able to hear her so you can get a sort of sense.
How do you feel that this project changed your semester? Did it change the way you experienced the semester?
A lot.
Yeah?
Because, really changed. But because Because of this project, I have to speak English with someone to do the recording. So it was really good time to speak English. And this interview, so 3 times, is really a good time to improve my English, because I can make sure this is the correct way to use or wrong. And then you also teach me the new words or expression. Like the one I really clearly remember is "hold it back." So it was really, really good experience, because the "hold it back" or the "passed away" or
Okay, so here she's really referring to all the words that I've helped scaffold, like slim, throughout her interview process. So as you can see, she's not an advanced learner. So they really became collaborative learning opportunities, like you saw with the word slim. And here she's referring to 2 other instances that we had in other interviews, hold it back and passed away. So we were talking about sad movies, and she said she couldn't hold back the tears. We were talking about her father and how she wanted to study abroad to honor his memory. And she told me that he passed. And I said, well, maybe passed away might be a better expression. So all of these kinds of learning that was happening within the interview, and also these identities of a positive and willing and motivated language learner and adventurer that I had socialized with.
How do you feel that this project changed your semester? Did it change the way you experienced? How do you feel that this project changed your semester?
Yep, goes away. Perfect. Okay. So, I really began thinking about autoethnography when I was invited to participate in the panel. And this is certainly not autoethnography in its purest sense. This is a reflexive approach. But I started reading work by Ellis, who talks about work with intimate others. And she says that relational ethics requires researchers to act from our hearts, to acknowledge our interpersonal bonds to others, and initiate and maintain conversations. So that really caught my eye as a compelling reminder about our duty to our participants, and particularly when we conduct ethnographic or other forms of in-depth qualitative research. She maintains that relational ethics require us to act from our hearts, right, and do no harm. So something you might have noticed as I was pointing out my really strong evaluative stances, such as you're brave, etc., is that they often surface when Amy's being negative about herself, when she's putting herself down, when she's acting discouraged and unhappy and displeased, okay? So why then was I producing these evaluations? Well, it's out of heart and do no harm. I can't let, in good conscience, a study abroad student suffer and think that everything is her fault when I feel personally that it's not. And I think to do so in an interview would be borderline unethical, right? So, but then what are the consequences? Now I have encouraged her to be this way and to think about study abroad this way as well. So what are the consequences for my research? So this is kind of where I ended up at the end, which is not a really good answer, but here we go. Just when I think I have a handle on guiding principle about research with intimate others, on closer examination, my understanding unfurls into the intricacies, yes, and uniqueness and relational and personal responsibilities of the particular case under question. So basically, this is just to say that I continue to discover what it is that my relationship does with my participants and how it affects their sojourns. And I think it does so in quite unpredictable ways. And I encourage, I think, all researchers to really think about how their interview techniques, how their research designs, how their questions especially are shaping the way that study abroad students are reflecting on and mediating their own experiences, because it's certain that they do. I think we can't escape that thought. And also to be kind to ourselves and to realize that that's okay. And that we also have an ethical duty to our participants to help them when they're having trouble, right? So yeah, I think that's where I'll stop, because I think I'm pretty close, so some references.